Hello everyone, welcome to the CBS Free Skill Acquisition Program. My name is Nasir Elias and I'm going to be taking you today on pattern drafting. Alright, so on today's class, we're going to be talking about 5 key outlines. Number 1 is going to be the tape rule, how to use the tape rule. And number 2 is understanding how to use the tape rule. Number 3 is drafting a shirt pattern. Number 4 is drafting a t-shirt pattern, and 5 is drafting a trouser pattern. So let's go straight into it. So for the benefit of those who don't understand what pattern drafting is all about, I'm going to give you a brief explanation. Okay, so pattern drafting is the creation of patterns for the production of various types of products that fall into the same category. So what I'm trying to say is this. So if you have different designs of a particular shirt, for example, and you want to produce in various sizes, so you could have patterns for sizes that fall between chest 40 and 44, and you have a pattern for chests that fall between 45 and 49. What patterns simply helps you to do is they help you reproduce to look the same way in various sizes. Even for people who are very good at using patterns, they could use one pattern to produce maybe about 5 or 6 different sizes, and that's the beauty of pattern drafting. This is not normal in the Nigerian context. A lot of tailors and fashion designers do freehand cutting, and the problem with freehand cutting is that there are a lot of times where you have errors. But with a pattern already drafted on ground, it reduces your error rate and also helps you to ensure your products are uniform. So basically, pattern drafting is good for a fashion brand. If you are trying to create a brand, it's better you create patterns, you draft out your patterns so that your clothes can follow a particular sequence, and the outputs would always look the same at all times. Even when you have a XXL shirt, it still looks the same way, as in the details still look the same way a medium-sized shirt looks like. Imagine like a TM Lewin. Everybody has always known a TM Lewin shirt, the lower end to look this way. It has like a tail, and then the chest part looks shorter than the part that covers your butt. So basically, they were able to achieve this because they have a standard pattern they use. So that's why pattern drafting is very, very important for every fashion brand to inculcate. So now let's go straight into talking about the tape rule. The tape rule is the first most vital part of fashion designing, of tailoring, anything that has to do with fashion creation of products and all of that. So basically, this is what the tape rule looks like. It starts at 0 to 1 all the way to 60, all for inches. I'm going to use inches because we're used to using inches in Nigeria. In some other climes, like the French climes, they use centimeters, but in Nigeria we use inches. So I'm going to basically teach you about the inches. So for an inch in Nigeria, what we let me write this tape rule, the tape rule. So because that's what we are talking about now. So for an inch, for every inch in a tape rule, you have 8 points: point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5, 6, 7, then 8. 8 is the 1 inch mark. So this is usually the 1/4 inch mark. This is the 1/2 inch mark. This is the 3/4 inch mark. It's because this is the same as 2/8, because you have 8 points. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You have 8 points, so it's 2/8. If you round it up to the smallest number, it gives you 1/4. This is like 4/8. That's the half mark. So obviously, when you break it down, it comes to half. This is 6/8. So everything is graded on 8 for a single inch. So that's where I like to start, because understanding what a tape rule is and how to use it is what helps you to, create patterns right. All right, so understanding the tape rule. Yeah, why did I actually make this a heading on its own? Okay, so already I've given you the basics of a tape rule, and understanding how to use the tape rule is another very, very important thing. Basically, there are some rules in using a tape rule. I mean, tape rule usage basically is all about mathematical calculations. If you are trying to achieve something, say maybe you want to build the chest of a shirt now, for example. The shirt is folded into 4 places. So it means that when you are using the tape rule, it means the 1/8 is useful for you because it comes to something. I'm trying to write out all the points. This is 6/8, yeah. Then this is 1 inch. Okay, so when you are trying to, so for a shirt, now a shirt chest, when trying to cut a shirt chest, for example, now, it means this point is also important, because, for example, maybe you want to add ½ inch to the chest of somebody. This point 1 is what you need to give you ½ inch. Why? Because the shirt chest is divided into 4 places. For example, it's divided into 4 places. So this is how a basic shirt chest that you're trying to cut will look like after you've cut it out, because you have to fold this part by, say, 2 inches. You have to create a neckline. You have to create the shoulder. You have to create the chest. You have to create the stomach. So say, for example, this thing was not, maybe your initial measurements that you had, or that was created on the pattern, was shorter than this by ½ inch. And if you want to add that ½ inch to it, all you need is just this point. Adding this point to it, just 1 point. Because 1 point in 4 places, because this is 1/4 of the chest. It's 1/4 of 1/4 of an entire chest. So that particular 1 point in 4 places would give you, it will give you ½ inch, because, like I told you, 1 inch is in 8 places. So looking at, say maybe you want to add 1 inch now, so you need quarter of an inch to give you 1 inch. So now, basically this the tape rule now, yeah, although there are some tape rules that go beyond 60 inches. Imagine you want to sew a shirt for somebody who is, say maybe the chest of the person is 62 inches. You might be thinking you need a tape rule that has more than 60 inches. You don't, because all you need to do first is divide that measurement, that person's chest, into 4 places. That's about 13 and a half. So before you now put your sewing allowance, usually the sewing allowance, when you are creating a pattern, is best to say, maybe if you know most, so creating a pattern now, you have to look at average of what people do. So if somebody normally, if you know most tailors use ½ inch, and there are some tailors that use 1 inch as their sewing allowance, it's better to use 1 inch when you are creating it, when you are drafting a pattern. Because if you use ½ inch, then the person that uses 1 inch as the sewing allowance will have a problem with that shirt, because the output of the shirt would have reduced. What you get at the end of the day, the chest will be reduced compared to what is supposed to be there. So if you are creating a pattern, you need to have added that extra for those people that use 1 inch. So if you are using 1 inch, obviously this person using the ½ inch can trim into attaining ½ inch sewing allowance. for their own sewing and all of that. So all of these kind of things are things that you have to put into consideration when creating patterns for shirts, creating whatever type of pattern you want to create. If it's be it the shirt, be it the t-shirt, be it the trouser and all of that. So you have to be more generic with how you create your sewing allowances and all of that. So after this, I would like to go straight into talking about the shirts. Drafting a shirt pattern. This is what I really love to do. I actually find shirts as a very exciting part of tailoring, and that's why we actually specialize on making shirts in my company. All right, so talk about shirts, drafting shirt patterns. Okay, so to draft a shirt pattern, you need the measurements of what you're trying to create. Say maybe you want to draft a shirt pattern for, I usually advise that if you're planning to just create one pattern, it's better to pick that pattern that is in between all the sizes that you want. So not like you pick the smallest pattern size or you pick the biggest pattern size, which will now create so much disparity when you want to create lower sizes or higher sizes and all of that. So it's better to go from the midpoint. So for example, say maybe you usually produce shirts between medium, large, XL. So it's better to create a large shirt pattern. So basically I would use our large shirt pattern, our large shirt sizes with the dimensions we use for them. So what you need to know about dimensions. First things first, I'll talk about the length, the chest, the waist. When I mean waist, I don't mean waist as in proper waist, I mean up waist, which is going to be the shaping point of the shirt. And then then you're going to talk about the shoulder, the sleeve circumference, some people call it arm, and then we'll talk about the neck. So these are dimensions that you need to cut the chest of a shirt. Okay, so for a large size in our company, what we do is a length 31. The chest is usually 46. The stomach is usually 42. The shoulder is usually 18 and a half. Some people will say they prefer 19. Well, it depends on whatever your brand does. Sleeve, we use 26 and a half, or let's say 26. Although you don't really need sleeve when you are cutting a chest, but you are going to need sleeve when you are creating pattern for sleeve. And then arm, you somewhat need arm when you are cutting, because it's the arm circumference of the triceps, or say around it. Yeah, so this is 16, then the next size is 16 and a half. So the reason why you need the neck size is so that you don't create a neckline hole that would now become bigger than what would be needed to make the shirt. It's better to trim into what you want to use rather than have it bigger than what you can use eventually. So folding your pattern, your cloth will look somewhat like this. I'm going to be using this as an example because I would also try to fold a real fabric for you to see. So I'm going to fold this 2 inches. It's standard when you're making a shirt. This is the area where the flap is. This is the creation for the flap, and this is only done when you want to cut the chest. You don't need to fold this when you're cutting any other parts. You don't need to fold it when you're cutting the sleeve or the cuff, or the shoulder or the back. It's just the chest that you need it for. That's the front chest, So now the first thing you're going to mark out is the neck area. Now already I see that this is a neck 16 and a half. The neck is not too big, is moderate. So what I'll do, most tailors usually do 3 inches here. So because it's a pattern, I'd rather make it smaller. Rather than do 3 inches, I could do 2 3/4. Do you understand? Then the height, I could now make the height 3 inches, because it's usually better when you're cutting a shirt that one side is longer than the other. Or I could make this side 2 and a half and then make this 2 3/4. Do you get? So that I can draft out the neck in this manner. Because another thing you could do is follow this line, shape it, take a straight line, follow this line, take another straight line, and then draw your arc in between. That makes it easy for you. And then the next thing you do is you measure the shoulder all the way from here. So the shoulder, as we know, is 18 and a half. So that's 9 1/4. And then your sewing allowance. So some people around the shoulder, they usually use a sewing allowance of 1/2 inch. Some people use, I think, 3/4. So, but you hardly see people go beyond that. So maybe you add a 3/4 so that you stay on the safe side. And then so you don't need a shoulder deepening measurement, which is usually say about 2 inches to a shoulder slanting, not deepening, a shoulder slanting measurement that helps the shoulder of the shirt to fall on whoever is wearing the shirt. Now, because there is no human that their shoulder stands like this. Every human has a falling shoulder, not falling so much. Some people, you might call it a standing shoulder, but there's still a decline from your neck area. It falls down. So all of what you are trying to do is to build a pattern that is somewhat built around the shape of a human. You're not creating the clothes for decoration or whatever. You're creating it to fit perfectly on people. So you have to follow the real pattern of a human. So usually I say 2 inches is cool for a decline here, or some people would use 1 1/2. So this is 2 inches. I go all the way up there to the neck point. So this is going to be the shoulder slope. So after this, I need to now measure the armhole, which this arm would give me an idea of what I would use there. So for a 16 triceps, what you would probably use for the hole here would be, say, around so the sleeve itself, when you want to make it, the sleeve itself should have, say, like 10 inches in terms of the width. So for that reason, you have to take minimum 2 inches off that 10 inches to create this armhole, because you're still going to make a shoulder at the back. It's called a back landing. There's still going to be a back landing, and then because of the shape and all of that, so it's either you take out 2 inches or you take out 2 1/2. But for the purpose of ease, whenever anybody is joining, because they can easily trim to make bigger, I would take off 2 1/2 inches from that 10 inches. So which is going to give us 7 1/2. Some people would even take off 3. So let's take off 3. So from here, I'm going to mark the point where we have 7 inches. So my calculation here will be 7 inches. So this is where I'm planning my chest to start from. So wherever my chest is starting from, I then measure the chest, which is 46 divided by 4. So this is where I was talking about your 0.1 being useful. 0.1 is the 1/8 of a tape rule. The first point is useful in this point, in this area, when you are cutting shirts, when you are cutting native tops. But when you are cutting a t-shirt, it's not useful, because that is divided into 2. The chest is divided into 2 and not into 4. So for example, so in this case, I'm trying to achieve a 46 inches. So 46 divided by 4, what does that give me? That gives me about, let me see, this is 4, this is 1, and then here, this is I think 11 and a half or something like that. Yeah, so it's 11 and a half. So I first measure my 11 and a half from this point all the way here. Once I get my 11 and a half, then I now add the sewing allowance. Usually what is ideal here is to add like 1 inch sewing allowance, or maybe 1 inch point 1 because of this flap. So you could do 1/8 inches. You add that as your sewing allowance. Then you come down. You also need to know the up waist. Now, to calculate the up waist of a shirt, what you are going to do is divide the length. The up waist is usually is also called the half length, but it's not exactly half length. So you are supposed to divide the length by 2 and then add 2 inches to whatever you get. So dividing this by 2, you get 15 and a half. Then while you add 2 inches to 15 and a half, you get 17 and a half. So from this point all the way, so sorry, I forgot one very important thing. The first thing we were supposed to measure was the length. When we started cutting the shirt, we were supposed to measure the length. So the length is the first thing you do. So this is your 31 inches. You can decide to add half an inch. You can decide not to add anything. So you could maybe add half an inch for safety purposes. So this is 31 and a half. So when you come to the first 17 and a half, let's say your 17 and a half is here. So this is where your stomach is going to fall. So how do you now measure the stomach? The stomach is supposed to be 42. 42 divided by 4 is what again? Is 10 and a half. So 10 and a half, you measure that. Let's say it's here. Following this 17 and a half length is where you're going to measure the 10 and a half. And then you now add your sewing allowance, which is 1/8. By the time you add that, you have your shirt come out this much. And so this length, this 10 and a half you also measured here, is from here. It's not anywhere else. It's from the tip of the cloth. So I'll try to show you a real cloth and what I mean in the next but after I do all of this, so that you understand, because I'm just going to strike out what I get on a real cloth, and then show you how it looks like. And next you're going to need to cut the hip. Although I didn't write an hip measurement for this shirt, it's because it's a male shirt. Usually the standard internationally is to make your chest 1 inch bigger than your hips. So when your chest is 1 inch bigger than your hips, because it's a man's shirt, you are going to get 45 inches. So when you divide 45 inches by 4, what you get is about 11 1/4 or so. So to get that 11 1/4, you have to most people they'll think it's just to come to the end of the shirt and then mark your 11 1/4 and add 1/8 as the sewing allowance. But let's do that first. But that's not what you are supposed to do. What you are supposed to do is look at what type of shape you want to create for your shirt. How many inches deep would the shape be? So if the shape of your shirt looks somewhat like this, let's say maybe this is 3 inches from the tip of this shirt. So you're going to come here. It's at that 3 inches point, 3 inches to the end, to the tailed end of the shirt, is where you are going to measure this your what's it called, 11 1/4 inches plus the sewing allowance. This is where you measure it. So once you have the measurement, you could just strike it up here, bring it up here, and then so when you trace out the shape, this is what you get. And then here also you need to curve your shirt, right? So you could use broken lines so that you don't have. So but for this, achieving your broken line, you could decide
to start to carry the shirt up from the midpoint of this whole measurement, which is here. So this could be where your shirt starts to go up into the 3 inches gap that you gave gave for the shape of the shirt. So this is what it would look like. And then I've not curved out my armhole, so now I'm going to cover out my armhole. So you can't cover out an armhole looking like this. You can't do this. It's not possible. Your shirts won't come out well. There will be so many, extra clothing here, and for that reason you would have an irregular looking shirt. So the best thing to do is because you see the human body, a man's chest looks somewhat like this, the arm, the ball and socket joint creates this kind of effect, this masculine. Even when the man is not muscular, he still has this round shape, however tiny it looks like. So the ball and socket joint still gives you, and then the flesh around that area still gives you that circular shape. So for that reason, you need to come and give a defined circular shape here. Some people use all these mathematical instruments that have all those S curves and all of that to achieve this circular shape, even also when achieving this. So basically that is what the chest pattern of a shirt looks like. So to draw this without all of these inches around it, let me flip a page and just sketch it out for you to see what it will look like. So ignore this extra line. So basically this is what it's going to look like. So that is what we're trying to achieve all along. So once you have this alone is enough for you to use to cut your chest and to cut the back of your shirt. So once you take this, then you can now start applying freehand cutting on the remaining. So which so you can also use a bit of patterns at the back, but your pattern won't be a full pattern anymore when you need to create the back. With this pattern that you've created, once you cut out the chest block for a shirt, the back, when you are cutting it out, you put the chest block you already cut, you put it on the back, and then take a pattern that looks somewhat like this. This is how the shoulder pattern for the back of a shirt looks like, something like this. So it's basically to give you a curve, that because your shoulder is dripping. There's no way your shoulder won't drip. Even if you don't have a dripping shoulder, when the shirt is falling, it still doesn't look bad. It doesn't take away. It doesn't create any problem for your fitting, even if it's dripping beyond how much your shoulder drips. So that's why it's better for you to have a dripping shirt rather than have a shirt that stands like this. In fact, that's where most tailors get it wrong, where they slant your shoulder by say maybe a ½ inch, 1 inch, or less. Do you get? Or they don't even slant at all. That's the first area they get it wrong. So they create this extra bag around your fabric, around the armhole area. So then the next thing to talk about on the shirt patterns is how to create this block that I'm talking about here. So if you want to create this block, it's basically creating this with a so it's called the shoulder block for the back, because the back of a shirt block should look somewhat like this. Say they are facing the same direction. This is how the back should look like. So this is necessary to create this shape. So how do you create this kind of block? It's basically measuring the shoulder, the inches allowance. So let's say you have your pattern, your chipboard that you want to use to create a pattern. It's like this. Say maybe it's bigger than that shoulder. The shoulder we want to achieve is 18.5, right? So you first measure your 9.25, which is half of 18.5, because when you are measuring shoulder, it's half. You're dividing whatever measurement into two. So you are dividing into two when you are making the shoulder pattern for a shirt. So for this, what you simply do is, say maybe you have a block, your chipboard could be as full as this paper, but what you just need is something this small to create the block for the shoulder that slopes the back. So what you simply do is, say maybe you could just measure like 3 inches out as the height. Then this is where you need the measurement of the shoulder. So like I said, it's 10.25 for the division. 9.25 to achieve half of 18.5. So that 9.25 will give you, you measure that 9.25 now, right? 9.25. Then you put your sewing allowance, which I said maximum will be 3/4. So do this. Then your slope, how many inches of slope do you have here? You have 2 inches here. You don't need as much as that 2 inches at the back. Half inch is fine. I said half inch. 1.5 inches is fine. So let's say this is 1.5 inches of slope. Then shape it. So you could start from the center point, which is half of that measurement of this full block that you want to use. So you start to shape down at that point. So then you have this pattern, this type of pattern that you use to create your backs. So every other thing, this should fit into this. That's this, and this should fit. This place should fit. This place should fit. But the back is half an inch as wide as the front. So it means that you pull this back. When you put it on this, you give it an half-inch gap. And then also from the top, this is supposed to be 1.5 inches shorter than, that's this point. It's supposed to be 1.5 inches shorter than the apex of the shoulder. So all of these little details, once you get it right, your front and back blocks are in order. So now let's talk about this real shoulder of a shirt, because a lot of people call it the back landing. So this is usually also calculated by dividing into two. So if you want to create a back landing block, you probably need a chipboard 7.5 inches long. Let's say this is 7.5 inches, or 7 inches is also fine. 7 inches long is fine. What you really want to bring out of it is about 5.5 inches. That's for the shoulder of our own size, because we don't like to create shoulders that are too big. So I'm just looking at other people that like big shoulders and all of that. So the measurement, like I initially said, which is supposed to be 9.25, you apply it. So this is your 9.25. Once you apply it, you have the 3/4 sewing allowance. This is still the same thing. So now at this point, say you rule your line now, and then you measure your 5.5 inches, following our own standard. You will use 5.5 inches. Then your slope should be to this point. From this apex, shoulder apex, you are still going to follow a 2 inches slope all the way, right? But some people even like to slope this a little bit more, so that they make room for that back slope that will be made at 1.5. So you can make this 2.5, or you can even still stick to 2 inches. So let's say 2 inches from the top. This is what you have. So it's a straight line, it's not curved. So now if say we are starting from this edge, and before you even slope, before you get your apex, the point you are going to use as the apex of the shoulder, you should have drafted out the neck. So your neck, after you've measured your 5.5 inches, when you want to draft out your neck, you should come from the tip of this chipboard and measure 1.25 inches, right? Once you get your 1.25 inches, then you measure whatever. What did you give the front of the shirt at the starting point? You gave it we gave it a wideness of 2 3/4. Then you should make this 3 inches. So you measure 3 inches, right? Then you now deepen the shape into, because also you can just draw out a line here and draw out a line here, and then put an arc in between to achieve that. So once you get that, that's where your apex of the shoulder would come from. So never mind this first apex that I drew. So you go into the apex, go from the apex to the slope of the shoulder. So once you've done that, you should also, you can leave this like this, or you can create this small arc that is supposed to be here as well, because this is not supposed to be straight when they are really using it. But you can leave it straight. Whoever is sewing, when they get to that point, they will trim. So what I am saying in essence would look like this. This is your shoulder pattern. This is the shoulder block. Also known as back landing. So this is what it should look like. And then finally, we're going to talk about the sleeve. So after the sleeve, we'll be wrapping up the shirt patterns. So now talking about the sleeve, we're going to be talking about a sleeve length of 26. So if you are talking about a sleeve length of 26.5, how do you achieve that? So if you have a chipboard of this size and you want to cut your 26 inches out, what you're going to do is simply, cut out a straight part first, and now start going by your measurement. First thing, you have to give them a sewing allowance at the initial point, which is where the sleeve would enter into the shoulder. You could give them a 3/4 inch sewing allowance, or 1 inch, depending on who, or we could just give them, let's do a 3/4 inch sewing allowance. So then from this point, you now, after the sewing allowance, you now measure whatever you want. Say if you are saying 26.5, measure 26.5, right? But be aware that there's going to be a cuff. So because of the cuff that you want to put, what I usually advise when you are creating a sleeve pattern is create for a 2 inches cuff, create for a 3 inches cuff, create for a 2.5 inches cuff. So if you are creating 26.5 sleeve pattern, what you should do is measure the cuff and the cuff allowance. So say 26 inches, measure one. Okay, so this is 26.5 inches. What's the cuff? 2 inches cuff, Abby. If you remove 2 inches cuff from this, what would they give you? 24.5. What about the sewing allowance of the cuff, the shirt entering into the cuff? You need 1/2 inch. So that 24.5 now becomes 25 because of the sewing allowance that you need for the sleeve to enter into the cuff. So at that 25 inches mark, but after the sewing allowance here, because by the time you add this sewing allowance here, you should be having something like 25 3/4 or 26. So that's what will give you for 2 inches cuff. Do you understand? So imagine you want to do a 3 inches cuff. So you just be taking out 1 inch from this. So it's better on our own pattern. What we did is we drew a line which gives us, so this first line is for 2 inches cuff, next one is for 3 inches cuff. So that next one, this point, instead of being 20 for 26 and a half shirts, it will be 27 and a half shirts here, because now the cuff is now even longer. So for that longer cuff, the sewing allowance, the body of the sleeve would be shorter, because the cuff is now taking more inches than it used to. So then at that point where you have the length of the cuff, whether maybe 2 inches or 3 inches, or it's better you might also create this separately, create for 2 inches cuff, because the wideness of that point that enters into the cuff is also quite important. So what we're saying basically is this. So when you now, like I said at the initial point, I said that for a 16 arm circumference size, what you need is like an allowance of about 10 inches, or a pattern width of 10 inches. So this 10 inches now is what I am going to cut based on. So now this is your 10 inches flowing. This is where the stuff is going to get to. Say maybe if we want to use the 2 inches cuff, this is where your 10 inches stops, Abby, right? So this is planned for 2 inches cuff, right? Now I have created this as 10 inches wide. What I'm going to do at this point is, this is where the sewing allowance starts from, right? So imagine this is where the chipboard starts from. So this now I'm going to measure 3.5 inches for the slope shape. 3.5 inches. No, sorry. No, 4.5 inches. 4.5 inches for this. Three is fine. 3.5. So I'm going to measure 3.5 inches, and based on that 3.5 inches, I'm going to slope the shirt. So at the midpoint also of the two sides is where my shape starts. So from this I'm going up. Initially I could use broken lines. So when I get into this half point, then I start to come out. So the shape basically looks like this. And then from this also at the cuff point, so for a 16 arm circumference, your cuff should be about 10 inches wide. So if you want a 10 inches wide cuff, there's a sewing allowance. Sewing allowance for sleeves is usually between 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch. So if you calculate that 3/4 inch plus 3/4 inch plus whatever the measurement is supposed to be, so at this point plus that 10 inches cuff, right, that's 10 3/4. You also need a pleating, because every shirt has a pleating point at that point where it enters the cuff. So the pleating is usually around 1.5 inches for a double pleat. So for that 1.5 inches, you now add it to this 10 3/4 that you have. So what does that give you? That gives you about 12.25, if I'm right. Yeah, 12.25. So that is what you want to achieve here, the wideness at the point where the sleeve enters into the cuff. So the wideness will be 12.25. So this 12.25 is going to be divided into 2, which is going to be 6/1/8. 6, that's 6 inches plus 0.1. So that's 6 inches 0.1. That will not take straight into this point. But if you really want the shirt to really look fitted, you might have to make it a bit of an arc. Do you get? So because this will now make this sleeve area fit a lot more, so you can make a little bit of an arc of it. But first draw the straight line, then now trace a bit of an arc out of it. So what you are going to have for a fitted sleeve would look somewhat like this. Let me quickly just give you how that would look. for a fitted sleeve, you have something like this, right? But if it's not a fitted sleeve, it will look like this. So you have your, so it's, instead of it shaping up at this point, it's just slanted. It's not like it has a defined shape at any point in time. It's slanted, not this, because that was too straight. So look at the difference. There's a shape, there's an archy shape around the elbows where it starts. So to create to create a better fit, and this that just looks straight. So that's it for making a shirt pattern. All right, so we're coming to the very easy part of pattern drafting, which is drafting the pattern of a t-shirt, because this has become important because of the increasing acceptability of t-shirts. T-shirt pattern. Some people call it TEE shirt pattern. Yeah, okay. So basically, how do you draw a t-shirt pattern? So this usually, as against the shirt, the block is divided into 4 in a shirt. To get the chest block, you are dividing the measurement into 4, but for a t-shirt, they are dividing the measurement into 2, because your chest block is supposed to look somewhat like this, although you can still divide it into 4, but that means it's half of the t-shirt you'll be cutting out, and usually a lot of times that increases the measurement of what you end up getting, because your t-shirt because when there's extra material, you don't really notice it for a t-shirt, so it's better to cut out the block looking like this. So this is how the pattern usually looks like for a t-shirt. So how do you achieve this? Basically, you start, the first point where you start from, say let me say, for example, we want to cut the t-shirt for a large shirt, a large t-shirt. So a large t-shirt is, so for t-shirts, all you need is length, chest, and the sleeve length, and also the arm circumference, and then the round sleeve. So because for purpose of ease, what we are going to be cutting is short sleeve length. So for the length of a large t-shirt, what you have for the length is about 29. The chest would be 44, and then the sleeve would be 9 inches. Then the arm circumference would be, say, the same 16 or 15 and a half, or we could say 15, 15. Then the round sleeve should be about 14 or 13 and a half. 14 should be fine. Now, how do you achieve all of this? You start first with the length of the t-shirt. So we'll create a block. Let's say this is your chipboard block. You measure the length first. Length 29 and a half, Abby. So this is the chipboard length, 29 inches. But then you also need, you now need sewing allowance for this. It's usually called folding allowance. So that folding allowance is somewhat around, sewing allowance, because it's folding allowance, and at the same time the joining allowance for the shoulder. So if normally folding for a t-shirt is usually around 1 inch, so for that joining allowance of about ½ inch, that gives you about 1.5 inches. So instead of 29, so this is where 29 stops, you are adding an extra 1.5 inch, which is the sewing allowance. So what you are going to have is 30.5 inches, right, for the length. So then you are now talking, the next thing is the chest. So you just divide this by 2 and you put it straight as your dimension. So if you want to add, say, an extra sewing allowance, usually the most you should add is like an ½ inch, because usually this expands. So most people just do straight 22 as the wideness, because by the time you finish sewing, it expands back to that 22 a lot of times. It's very few times that you have it less than 22. So most people do 22 straight. So but for purpose of perfection, you might just do 22.5, so that even if it doesn't expand, it comes to 21.5, which is still around the room of safety for cutting and all of that. So then next thing you do is you measure the shoulder. How do you measure the shoulder? This is the full length of the the full width of the block that you have. Your shoulder is supposed to be this measurement minus, this measurement divided by 2, which is 11.25, minus the division of your, what do you call it, minus the division of the shoulder measurement plus ½ inch. So if your shoulder measurement is, I didn't give you a shoulder measurement. We also need a shoulder measurement here. So the shoulder measurement should be around 18 inches. So if you divide it by 2, you are going to get 9 inches. So when you divide 9 inches, when you add ½ inch to 9 inches, all you have is 9.5. So by the time you deduct this 9.5 from 11.25, it's going to give you 1/3. So all you do is subtract 1/3 here. You subtract another 1/3 here also. So you can have a balanced shoulder. So then you now identify your. So for t-shirts, it's not good to slope it as much as you slope a shirt. So 1.5 inches slope is fine for a t-shirt, or even 1.25. So I'll just go with 1.25 inches slope, because when you slope a t-shirt too much, it now it starts to look funny, like it was an overkill. So also, this is your slope. Don't start to draw. That was a mistake. Also, now what you need to do from this point, also you need to understand where is the center point of the entire material. Mark that center point. Say maybe you fold it into 2, or you spread. That center point is where you now come and mark the neck. So the neck, usually for a t-shirt of, say, like a large, is about 5 inches or 4.5 inches wide. So what you do is, at that center point, you come to this side. You put your center point as the center of 5 inches, which is 2.5. So what you have here is 2.5 to this side, 2.5 to this side. You have your 5 inches. Or if it's 4.5, you have 2.25 to this side, 2.25 to this side, which is 4.5 at the end of the day. So you now slope from this shoulder slope into that 4.5, slope on the other side as well. So then at this point also, you need your deepening length. So your deepening length shouldn't be more than, say, about 3 inches. So once you mark that 3 inches here, it might be cool for you to now fold the material into 2 to shape out this, because it's going to be quite difficult for most people to shape it out on its own. But there's something about a t-shirt. It's a round shape, not like the way a shirt is. So that 3 inches, well, it's also still sloped down, but it's not like the way a shirt is. The shirt's neck was somewhat like this. It was a bit slopey like this. The t-shirt is not like that. The t-shirt is straight round like this. It's round. is so much of a proper arc than the shirt is. So also the armhole here is also important to check the armhole based on this arm width. This arm width right here should be achieved with a 9 inches frame, like a 9 inches space. So that 9 inches, when you come to the body of the t-shirt, you don't shape a 9 inches straight, you shape like an 8 inches. So that's where your chest will now fall. Say maybe 8 inches. So you are leaving room for if there is need to to trim in future before putting the sleeve. So what you have is 8 inches, then you shape in. You know, like I said, it's better to use all those S curves and all of that in the mathematical set to achieve all of that. So already you have the chest block of a t-shirt. So when you want to cut the back, all you have to do when you are placing this on a fabric is it's enough to cut both front and back. So when you are cutting the back, all you have to do is just come down by half an inch here to shape the back. That's all. So on everything, you cut out back first, then the front you now fold it out and cut it to cut the front. So that's it for the chest of a t-shirt. So we'll go into cutting the sleeve of a t-shirt. So the sleeve of a t-shirt should look somewhat like this same shape that I told you about when we were cutting a shirt sleeve. It's the same shape, it's about the same idea. So but in terms of t-shirts, all you need in terms of sewing allowance is usually around 1 1/4 and 1 inch, and half an inch. So once you've applied half an inch here room on your chipboard, this is your chipboard, you add half an inch sewing allowance. What do you need? 9 inches. You measure your 9 inches after half an inch sewing allowance. You mark, and then you give us a folding allowance, which is 1 inch. You mark your 1 inch here. At this 1 inch point, this is how long the sleeve would be. So here, instead of the 3.5 that we use to shape in the shirt, 3 inches is fine for a t-shirt. So go by 3 inches as your deepening shape. So that 3 inch, you shape in, you come here, you shape at the center point. Like I said, center point is where you slope and change the direction of the shirt. So what is the round sleeve? I said it's 14. So divide 14 by 2, you get 7 inches. It's better not to put a sewing allowance here, or at the most put half an inch. So let's say maybe you put half an inch sewing allowance, then you have 7.5 inches as this sewing allowance here. So then also you must ensure, this was something I forgot to mention, at 3 inches mark for that long sleeve shirt. Let me quickly take you guys back to that. At the 3 inches mark on this sleeve, whichever sleeve, whether fitted sleeve or, you must measure your sleeve width that you were trying to achieve with an extra 3/4 inches sewing allowance. So this is the 3 inches mark. At this 3 inches mark, you must ensure you do that. So if your sleeve is 16, so that's 8 inches. So it's 8 inches plus 3/4 inches sewing allowance. So at this point you must have 8 3/4 inches. It's important, even for this or for this. So you must shape it like that first. It's from that point that you now achieve whatever shape that you want to give your shirt. So this your full curve must at least start after half of the full length of the sleeve. So coming back here, this should be achieved at 2 inches wideness. 2 inches from this from the shape. After that shape, you have 2 inches. That's where you now measure the measurement of the arm width, which is the 15 inches, which is 7.5. So this 7.5 plus another half inch, that gives you 8 inches. So 8 inches here, you come in to your 8-inch before you now go to the 7 inches. So once you do that, then you now put your folding shape there. So that's it for a shirt pattern. I mean t-shirt pattern. So I hope with all these basics that I've taken you through, we've been able to give you a quick view of how to create a t-shirt pattern, and I hope to see you guys as professionals very soon. Thank you.